Begin the current Daf, Mesech Yevamos Daf Tez Zayin, begin 3 lines down at the top of the Yemen. But the Gemara goes back and brings the longer story of the last raya from the top of the summit, which we had been discussing if Asu Beishamik Devrei Merloi, and we ended up bringing a raya that they did from the story of the Days of Herkiness. So the Gemara goes and actually brings the full story of what happened. Everyone's today's Daf. So we're discussing today's Daf. Like we said, the Gemara concludes really this machlekes regarding, we had mentioned the Mishnah, Beishamai says Sarah Sever's Mutter, Beisol says Sarah Sever's Aser, and we said that we had a discussion if Beishamai did like their own opinion or not, and we proved that they did do like their own opinion. The Gemara discusses Kedusha Rishayna. There were 2 times that the Jewish people came to Eretz Yisrael to build the Beis HaMikdash. The first time when they came to the days of Yeshua ben Nun, there is an opinion that holds Kitchel Shaita was only sanctified for the time being for the first Beis HaMikdash, Abit from Gol's Babel, but like Kitchel Asalabah, but they didn't sanctify for all future times. Hence, places which were not sanctified the second time around in the days of Ezra doesn't have a Chiv Shemitah, no Chumas Amaisus, and Matnas Hakim. If a Gentile or a slave cohabits with a Jewish woman, the child is a mamzer, and there's also love of a kal. Cheshvan Kedushin is a concept that there are certain types of people that we would be concerned, even if he's a non-Jew, that possibly he's Jewish, and we have to be concerned that his Kedushin is valid, and one would have to treat it stringently as if there's a Kedushin. Called the Parish Merubah Parish, a well-known halachic concept that when something is separated from a mass, that we base the law on the majority, and we presume that it's from the majority. In contrast, an interesting halacha, when something is stationary, we say it's 50-50, so even if you'll have a ratio of 10 to 1, but if it's a stationary doubt, then we'll actually say that it's going to be a 50-50. So like we said in the previous stuff, we concluded the shaila if Asa Beishamik Devreim or Lo Yasu, did they follow their own opinion of that of Beisil? We brought a price that says in days of Rabbi Herkiness they permitted Tzaras Abbas La'achen, which is obviously only according to Beishamai. Beisil holds that's the whole Masechta man up until this point basically. Tzaras Eretz forbidden. And in the days of Rabbi Herkiness they permitted Tzara of the Bas to co-wife to the brothers for Yibum. Obviously Shema Minah, Shema Minah, that's where our Gemara left off. Now the Gemara brings Gufa. The Gemara 3 lines down at the top of the Yom Daf Tezayin brings the longer story of what happened. They made Rabbi Herkiness. He tirud Tzaras Abbas La'achen. They permitted the sages the co-wife of the daughter, which is an erva, la'achen to the brothers to do yibum. Now, this is very difficult to the sages, and because Rabbi Herkiness was a great sage, and the sages thought he was the one who permitted it. And of course, we rule like Beisil, who holds that the Tzaras Erva is a chiyuv of karas. And here he is permitting the Tzara the Bas, the end of Kamul. Now, the Rabbi Herkiness, his eyes stopped, meaning he wasn't able to see anymore. So he didn't come to the Beis Medrash anymore. So he's in his house, and the gear says actually Amru. The vav is not Amar Umi, it's Amru Mi Yelech. They said, okay, who's going to go be and let him know that hello, you're passing for Klal Yisrael that Tzaras Habas, Tzaras Erev is permitted for Yibum. It's a chiv karas, it's a Eishat Shalem B'Cham Mitzvah. So who's going to go let him know that this is wrong? So I'm letting Bishur. Bishur said to them, Ani Elech, I'll go. And they said, who's going to go after Bishur? Rabbi Elazar ben Zari says, I'll go. Who's after him? Rabbi Kiva. So these 3 great Torah giants, they went and they stood by the entryway of his house. So his maidservant went into the Kodesh Panima, and Amrullah, she said to Rabbi Rebbe, my teacher, Chachmi Yisrael Boyin Etzlacha, the sages, the Jewish people, they're coming to you. So Amrullah said to them, he said to her, you come to let them enter. And they entered. Now, to Fasil Rabbi Yeshua, he grabbed Rabbi Yeshua, and he placed him on a golden couch, a golden bed. Amrullah, Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Daisy, he says, Rebbe, my teacher, tell your other students to sit down. I'm like, me, who's the next one? Was there a son to our friend Azariah? He pronounced on him the pasuk and tell him, I was a young man, I also got older. When they never saw the righteous person forsaken, and his children are seeking bread, meaning he knew Azariah was a great Talmid Chacham, but even his son is around and he's not forlorn. So therefore he was excited. So Tavsa Yeshiva Mitzvah Shazal, he went and he placed him on the golden bed. So Amalei Yeshua said to him, Rebbe, Amalei Tamitcha Achav Yeshiv, tell your third student, Tosa, sit down. Amalei said to him, Bihu, who's this? Says Akiva ben Yosef. Amalei Atu Akiva ben Yosef, you're the great Rabbi Akiva, Shashimcha Elef B'Sei V'El Matzeifa, that your name goes from one end of the world to the other end of the world. Shev ben Yishev, sit my son, sit. Kamoischa Yir B'Yisrael, like you, there should increase in the Jewish people. Okay, so they're all sitting there. So they started what's called rimringling. They started like going around and talking around halachic questions. They obviously had an agenda over here. Until they got to the co-wife of the daughter. They said to him, and what's the halacha with the co-wife of a daughter who's fallen for Yibam? Amalei said, that's a dispute if that's permitted or not. Halacha to me, they said, what's the halacha? Amalei, he said to them, halacha, of course, it's forbidden to do even to the tzaras erba. Amalei, they said to him, in your name, in the Welt they're saying that you say halacha is like b'shama, that you're allowed to do even to the tzaras erba. So Amalei said to them, wait a second, Doisa? That Doisa permitted shematim, that's what you heard? Or ben Herkinis shematim, or did you hear the son of Herkinis without the word Doisa? So Amalei said to me, you're right, Chai Rebbe, we swear by the life of Rebbe that Stam Shemana. We just heard unspecific, we heard Ben Hirkinis, but it didn't say the first name. So we presumed it was you. Amalei said to them, no, Ach Katan Yeshli, he says, I have a small brother, a younger brother, B'chor Satanhu. Simply translated is like he's a satanic firstborn. Rashi translates it's like he's sharp. And he stands on this principle, on this teaching, and he'll act on it, and he won't backtrack to do even if the public is disagreeing with him. But some Girsais bring on the side that it's not B'chor Satan, it's B'chor Shanan, either a sharp firstborn, or actually the word B'chor is actually not, both words have to be changed. B'chor, the Chaf is changed with a Ches. B'chor Shanan, a sharfa B'chor, I have as a smaller brother. The Yonasan Shema, his name is Yonasan. Who mitamid Shammai? He's from the students of Shammai, and he's the one that said this. When you heard Ben Herkinis, it wasn't me, Reb Daisa Ben Herkinis. It was my small brother Yonasan, and he's the one who's saying this because he's from the students of Shammai. And he actually said, "Vizar, be careful. He shouldn't cut you down with halachas. He has 300 responsim, but Tzar Sabas Shimuteres, that it's permitted to do yibum to Tzar Sabas." Aval, he says, he says, but I testify, heaven and earth, that on this mortar, Yoshev Chaggai Hanavi, the Navi Chaggai, he sat on this mortar. He said three things. Tzar Sabas, Asura, the co-wife of the Erva, is forbidden. Ammon and Moav, which, referring to the Jewish people who dwell in the lands of Ammon and Moav, which Rashi says disagrees that it was conquered by Moshe from Sichon, and it was sanctified with the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. But now in Bayesheni, in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, its Kedusha has been nullified, and you're allowed to plant on the Shemitah year, because as we'll explain, the first Kedusha is not around in the second Beis Hamikdash, and they didn't re-sanctify it. So they instituted that in the Shemitah year, which usually not all plant, but they're allowed to plant, that they should take off Meiser Rishon, and they should take off Ma'asr and Meiser Oni B'Shvias. That they tithe, the poor man's tithe in the Shemitah year, as the Gemara is going to explain later on, because we needed to provide for the poor people in Eretz Yisrael that don't have what to eat in the Shemitah year, because there's no more leket chikra, because every field is free for all, and so they could go to these lands of Ammon and Moav in the Shemitah year and take leket chikra and Meiser Ani. So therefore, that was the second thing he testified, and the third thing he testified was a Makabim Gerim. You could accept converts min HaKarduyin or min HaTarmudim from these two places. And the chiddush in that is, well, what is the chiddush? Why the regular non-Jews? No, we don't say that really they're mamzerim from Jewish women that had Gentiles who cohabited with them. Because there are certain rabbis, as we'll see, who invalidate those people because they're not just regular Gentiles, actually mamzerim from Jewish women. So he testified that no, that these three things, one is Tzar Sabas Asura, Lachos B'Gasil, so Reb Daisa ben Herkinis is saying, I would never pass, I would never rule. It's my younger brother Yonasan who's saying this, and Ammon and Moav that they take a Meiser Ani and Shemitah, and that you could receive Gerim from the Kardim and the Tarmudim. Now, Tana, we learned in the Braisa that Keshenichnasu, when these three Torah giants, Rabbi Shur, Rabbi Zayin, Akiva, came into Rabbi Daisa ben Herkinis' house, They came in one doorway. When they left, they left in 3 doorways, which Taisus brings because they didn't want to all be in one place. Because if Yonason wins them, because he's just the sharper one of the two, he's the better debater, they're gonna have a bezdin of 3 Talmid Chacham. They're gonna have to say halachas k'maiseh. Or to the contrary, says Taisus, that they went out in 3 different doorways because they wanted to find him and hear what he has to say. But be that as an A, Pagaboy, so this Yonason was around, he encountered Rabbi Kiva. And actually, he asked him, he fragged him up, and he got Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva didn't know what to say. So Yonason said to him, again, you have to understand, very sharp person. He said, Atu Akiva, you're Akiva, Shashem Chayilch Meseva, you're the grace, you give the biggest share, your name goes from place to place. Okay, you're very fortunate you got over there. But he got to Leroy Boka, but you didn't even reach till to be like a shepherd of cattle. That's like, saying, catch yourself, Rabbi Kiva doubled down on that. He says, don't worry. I didn't even reach to be like a shepherd of the flock, of the sheep. You know what I'm saying? Like, he wasn't so impressed with his line. And we don't paskin like him, even though he was a sharper, sharpshooter. Now, the other thing we said, so that's regarding the first thing he testified, which was not like his brother Yonason. Now, the second thing Reb David ben Hurkinus testified was Ammon and Moav, in these lands of Ammon and Moav, Ma'asn Ma'aser on B'Shvis. In the Shemitah year, the tithe, besides Ma'aser Rishon, which you give to the Levi, Ma'aser Ani is given to the poor man. Now, the truth is that in a regular year, the way it works is that the first 2 years of Ma'aser Sheni, which is the second tithe you take up to Yerushalayim, or at least it's the money's from that. And the 3rd year is Ma'aser Ani, 4 and 5 is Ma'aser Sheni, 6 years is Ma'aser Ani. In the 7th year, in Eretz Yisrael, the truth is there is no Ma'aser because everything is Hefker. Ammon and Moav, which, as we're going to shortly explain, since they don't have the halacha of Shemitah, rabbinically they instituted that, okay, well, we want you to separate Ma'aser Ani to benefit the Anim, to benefit the poor people. As the Gemara gives the background for this. Because like the master says, that Harba Karachim Kavshu Oile Mitzrayim, there were many cities that when the Jewish people were coming out from Mitzrayim, the generation after the Dehar Midbar, in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, coming to Eretz Yisrael, there were certain cities they conquered, giving it to Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, but the ones who came up from Bavel, in the times after the Churban Bayis Rishon, after Golas Bavel, and coming back up to the Bayis Sheni, they didn't conquer those cities. Now, the Kedusha Rishon, that first sanctity in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, was only Kitchel HaShaita, was only sanctified for its time. And it was not sanctified for all future time. And they actually left it not to sanctify it. Why? So that the poor people have what to rely on in the Shemitah year, which Rashi explains that because that they could either hire themselves out to be laborers, to plow and to harvest. So actually they can be making money by working the land. Or additionally, which is they have all the gleanings and the forgotten bundles and the corn of the field and the Ma'aser Ani, which the poor people don't have access to that anymore. In the Shemitah, it's a Hefkevelt, everyone's fields. So therefore, the Chacham left, there was parts like Ammon and Moav that they either was never covered the way Tais says, or it was covered in the first time, but not by the second time. Believe that as a man, because the original Kedusha was only L'Shaita, not L'Salavai, so therefore that was left for them. Now the third halacha that Reb David ben Hurkinus had testified from Chagai, Hanavi, was Mekabel Gerim and Karduim or Talmudim. One could accept Gerim from the people of Karduim and Talmudim. Says, is that really so? But Batani Rama Bayechaskel taught a Bryce a Mekabel Gerim and Karduim, which as the Gemara is going to explain later on, because they're Mamzer. Because really they were people, Jews that assimilated over there. And it looks like Gentiles, looks like the non-Jews, but really they're Jews. You cannot accept Gerim because it's not a valid Gerus. It's Mamzerim. A Ger can marry a regular Jew. A Mamzer cannot. So you can't accept Gerim from them because they're really Mamzerim. So wait a second, could you Makabel Gerim from Karduim or could you not? So Rav Ashi says, no, the Girsa by the Bryce of Ram by Chesed was Kartuyim Itma, with a tough, not with a dalit. It sounds very similar, Kartuyim, but it's Kartuyim. I mentioned like the people say Kartuyim Sur. That's one version of the conversation. That those that say a different version. Tanya Ram by Chesed, it says, the original version had it with a tough. But the Gemara assumed my love haini kartuim, isn't that the same thing? And therefore that contradicts the testimony of Chagai. Says Gemara, they're two different people. Because I mentioned like people say kartuyim psili, but the kartuyim are not psili, and therefore those Gentiles you could accept gerim from. Now, however, it's a machlekes. Because Rabbi Yehuda and Besavia, the Amrit Havaya, they both say ein mekabel gerim in the kartuyim. No, not like Chagai, which Teza brings. He's obviously not disagreeing with the Navi, but that obviously had a different tradition that you cannot be mekabel gerim min har kartuyim. Says Gemara, did the Rebbe really say this? What? Yeah, from the Talmudim. You cannot accept gerim from the Talmudim. Now, right, meaning Talmudim, meaning not the Kartuim. Yeah, exactly. And the contradiction is not from the other one. It's from the case of Talmudim. One of the cases that Chagai said was there was two cases of the Kartuim and Talmudim, and Rabbi Yechon disagrees with the Talmudim. The Talmudim you cannot accept, not like the first version had it from the Kabbalah of Chagai. But the Gemara says, really say this, that you cannot accept gerim from Talmudim, but what's not? We'll learn the Mishnah Masechtas Nida that says, Kalak Samim. Samim are stained garments with dam that haboim min haryakim, that come from ryakim. So tahirim, the halacha is, we don't have tum and tahar anymore. But obviously, besides the halacha of ksamim, of stains, regarding Hilchos Nida, there's also the halacha that the dam nida has tumah to it. So when one would find a stained garment, so if it's from a Jewish woman, so that would have a tumah as Hilchos tumah from Nida. But he's saying that if you find these stained garments coming from Rekim, tahir. Why? Because although we actually treat non-Jewish women also as Nidas, but that wasn't for the ksamim, that rabbinic law of ksamim, that we didn't treat them as the halachas of kesem. So when it's coming from Rekem, where you have, as Taisa points out, even though everyone knows the beginning of Masechtas is Gittin, maybe even the Rekem and the Cheger, but we presume that it's not from the Jews, and the majority are the Kachavim. So essentially, it's coming from non-Jewish women, and therefore it's going to be tummy. But Rerudim and Tami, Rerudim says no, it's going to be tummy. Why is it going to be tummy? Neshem Gerim, because actually the non-Jewish, so to speak, the people in Rekem are actually assimilated Jews. Meaning they were Gerim, who their dam is Batami, but Batoyim. But then they were what's called Himer Dasa, where they then renegated on that. They were Gerim, but then they went back to being to acting not Jewish. But there is still the Gezerah on their stains, because even though they sin and they rebel, you're still considered a Jew. Once you become a Ger, it's like there's no going back. And therefore, even if you decide to say, hey, I don't like this religion, I'm going to the next religion, it's not going to work anymore, at least in regards to Jewish law. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, some are going to be Tamei, because they're not really non-Jews over there. It's actually Gerim who assimilated, who went back to acting not Jewish. Now, if let's say the stained garment is coming from between non-Jews, where there's no Jews living over there, then it's going to be tar, because obviously it's coming from a non-Jewish woman. Now, but we had asked the following question on that Mishnah that does need to get into the base. Kapasik B'tani. The Mishnah is saying unspecifically, as if it's all-inclusive, that if the stained garment is coming from amongst the non-Jews, then there's no problem. We're not going to treat it as tummy. That sounds like, says the Gemara, because it's not differentiating. So obviously we don't suspect that the people in Talmud are Jews. And Rabbi Yechon actually said on this, and this is what we're asking from Rabbi Yechon himself. He said, this tells us that you can accept converts from Talmud, meaning because we don't say that they're Jewish mamzerim over there, that they're assimilated. We don't say that, because if we did, then we would have said that their garments. We should have said when it comes from we're saying that it comes from a non-Jewish place, so we don't have to be concerned for those stained garments because it's from non-Jewish women, not from Jewish women. So he should differentiate. He should have told me. But for Talmud, even those non-Jews, so to speak, it's not true. Those some will be stained, and they will be tamei because they're really Jews over there. It's really assimilated Jewish people, but you didn't say that. So Rabbi Yechon says, that you could accept Gerim from Talmud because they're not assimilated Jews, they're really non-Jews. So that contradicts Rabbi Yechon himself, who said that the Talmudim, You're not makabel gerim because they're mamzerim. So then how could you differentiate between that and the halachas of nida? So the Gemara says, maybe you're going to say that you're right. When your Bechina says zois, but it doesn't hold like it. He's just saying that's the inference of the Mishnah Masechtas nida. But he himself doesn't hold like that. But you can't say that because we know this is said many times in Shas. Bechina says halacha is like a stam Mishnah. That's an anonymous Mishnah. So obviously he holds like it. So again, we're back to the contradiction. How does the Bechina hold the Talmudim? Are they Avdei Kechavim or are they assimilated Jews? They're Mamzerim. So Amar says the Gemara, it's a machlekes Amaram, what Rabbi Yochanan held. Meaning the one who held that you cannot be Makabel Gerim from Talmud does not hold of this teaching. The Rabbi Yochanan holds that halacha is like a stam Mishnah. So although we mentioned many times in Shas that he holds a halacha stam Mishnah, there are Marom who disagree if Rabbi Yochanan says that halacha is always like an anonymous Mishnah. If you hold he does, then you hold that you could be Makabel Gerim from them. If you hold he doesn't, then he could say that you don't accept Gerim from the Talmud because they're actually assimilated Jews. But the Gemara says, "Mitam in my time of life." So what is the reason? Why can we not accept Gerim from the Talmudim? Meaning we've been explaining that obviously we're presuming them to be Mamzerim. Where do we get this idea from? Says the Gemara, "Pligim by Rabbi Yochanan and Sabia." So Rabbi Yochanan and Sabia have this disagreement. One says because of the servants of Shlomo. The servants of Shlomo were not Jewish, but they married Jewish women because of their great wealth. And they lived over there with the presumption of being non-Jewish. Now, this Tana holds that a non-Jewish man or a slave that has a relationship with a Jewish woman, the child is going to be a mamzer. Obviously, non-Jewish parents does not create a mamzer. Jewish parents also doesn't. But that relationship of a non-Jewish man or an Evan, that's also not fully Jewish, meaning a non-Jewish slave by a Jew, which is not fully Jewish, is Baal Bas Yisrael, that the Vlad's going to be a mamzer. So the servants of Shlomo, these avodim, although they, like we said, they have a partial state of Jewish, but they're not a full Jewish man, they went and married these Jewish women, because they were mighty and wealthy and affluent, and that assimilated couple now went and had children. Those are mamzerim, those are the ones who lived in Talmud. The other one says a different understanding, because of the daughters of Jerusalem, which the Gemara is going to shortly explain. When Yerushalayim was destroyed, so the non-Jewish men came and married those Jewish girls after by the war, by the destruction, and therefore that again was the same thing. Non-Jewish man with a Jewish girl creates children that are mamzerim. So the Gemara explains actually. We understand according to the one that says that it was the servants of Shlomo. Ksavi holds. As we said, a non-Jew or the Evan or a slave, a Baal Bas Yisrael that has a relationship with a Jewish woman, a blood mamzer that creates a child that's illegitimate, which we said he cannot marry people into the Kehillah. According to the one that says it's the daughters of Jerusalem, Mahi, what is that referring to? So so it's actually machlekes, but they're both saying over the name of Rabbi Bachana, but it's slightly different versions. Chadama one says, Tresa Alpha Gabri, there was 12,000 men, Veshita Alpha Kashtuyan, and there was 6,000 ones who were shooting the arrows. And Bechadam one says Tresa Alpha Gabri, there was 12,000 men, Uminayu Shita Alpha Kashtuyan. From the 12,000, 6,000 of them were the ones that were the archers. So be that as may, either it was 18,000 or it was 12,000, but these 18 or 12,000 men, when the idol worshippers were going into the sanctuary and pillaging and destroying by the Churban Bayis region, everyone's grabbing the gold and silver. As you see when the people are protesting, what's the first thing? You got to watch out for the Best Buys. Right? All the windows start getting smashed and they're taking out all the big screens and taking. So when they came to the base of Mikdash, what's everyone going after? The gold and the silver, and they're pillaging. These men, they interned on the Jewish girls in Yerushalayim. Like says the pasuk in Eicha, Nashim b'tzion inu. The women in Tzina were afflicted. The Sulais ba'avi Yehuda, the maidens in the cities of Yehuda, and that's what it means regarding B'nai Yerushalayim, that these non-Jewish men went and took these girls by the Churban Bayis Rishon. Related to what we said before, Amar B'Shlomo ben Nachmani, Amar Yensin says pasuk zeh. We mentioned this pasuk previously on Lamed Aleph, so he's just explaining, giving background to this pasuk. He says this pasuk Sara Elam Amra. which Rashi says is a malach. Taisus is trying to figure out who's the Sar Olam, because he brings from the Piyutim. And that's, again, one of the big sources that they say that when it comes, we're saying in these week's parashas, we say the Dal parashas, some people, like when it comes to Yitzhus and these types of things, so they all bring from Taisus throughout Shas, that Taisus quotes from the Piyutim to show that it's not a Kleinikite, but it sounds like that the Na'ar who serves is the Malach Metatron. So obviously he's the Sar Olam. The problem is that it sounds like that he was a Sar that turned to fire from flesh, which sounds like it was Chanoich who was Metatron. But that can't be the Sar Olam, because the Sar Olam is saying from Sheish Mei B'Reishis, Yismach Hashem B'Masa, but Chanech was not around B'Masa B'Reishis. So Tais is trying to figure out who is the Sar Olam. But be that as it may, it sounds like it's some type of a malach that says this pasuk, Nara Yisi Gam Zekanti. I was young and I was older. And we said this on Amad Aleph, that when he saw Rabbi Lazar Zarya, he says, Larisi Tzadik Nezuz Everybody Kishlachim, Azarya, our friend, has a son. So he's saying that it's Sar Olam says this, because Man Amir, who says this pasuk? What's the question? Ilemam. If you say it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu Meika Zikne Kameh, could you say Hashem saying Nara Yisi Gam Zekanti? Is Hashem get older? They'll David Amir. So we're going to say David Amel says it. Mikashish Kula, you think David Amel became Zaken? But he lived only till 70. He didn't become an old man. It's the Malach, the master of the world, that was saying this. Another teaching from the same Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says, mind this, what's in the pasuk in Eicha? Yodoi Padas Tzar. His hand, the oppressor stretched out, Akol Machmadan on all her desires. So what does it refer to? First, when the non-Jews were going into the sanctuary, everyone was reaching out, looting the gold and the silver. The people they went for the Sefer Torah. Why? Because Hamadi says, by this Torah scroll that says, that the people of Ammon cannot come into the assembly of the Jewish people. Let it be burnt in the fire, and therefore that's what they were going for primarily. Now another pasuk in Eicha that the Gemara expounds, Tziva Hashem leYaakov. Hashem commanded to Yaakov, Sevivav Tzara. Those who are around her, around it, are its oppressors. So Rabbi says, Kagun Haimanya. He says, for example, Haimanya, which were Greeks that would oppress Lefum Nahara, which were Jewish paupers. Meaning they were very close to the Jewish settlement, and they would always bother them. That's what the pasuk there in Eicha is referring to. Now, related to what we mentioned before, Omer Rav Yehuda, Omer Rav Asi, he says, says a non-Jew, if he walks up to a Jewish girl and he takes out a ring and he gives it to her, you have to be concerned that it's halachically a kedushin. Why? We know the great controversy regarding the 10 tribes. Maybe he's from the 10 tribes who they married non-Jewish women. This is where Rashi explains it, Tais explains it differently. That and this Tana holds that this teaching of Ravasi is that a non-Jewish man, a non-Jewish woman who gives birth from a Jewish man, the child is a mamzer. Meaning, before we were talking about, everyone agrees when the non-Jewish man with a Jewish woman, that's going to be a mamzer. Here he's saying that the reverse is also true, according to this opinion, that when you have a Jewish man having a relation with a non-Jewish woman, that the child is also going to be a mamzer, and therefore we're concerned for the children that they're mamzerim, and therefore if a non-Jewish man comes along and is makadosh a woman, we have to be concerned that maybe it's a valid kedushin, because it might be from a Jewish person. Says the Gemara, the classic Talmudic halacha. But we know of called the parish, whatever is separating Meruba parish, is separating from the majority. Now, the majority of the world is not the 10 tribes. It's definitely we're very infinitesimally small dust of the world population. So why would you say we have to be concerned for possibly it being a Jewish person that was assimilated when the majority is not? Says Gemara, we're talking about Yerai B'duchta de Kavi. We're talking about where there was a definite presence of stationary of the 10 tribes, which, as we know, that they're definitely in halacha about that idea where the 10 tribes are from. And there's halacha, what's called kol kavua kamersa mersadam. Whenever anything stationary, that we say that it's actually a 50-50 chance, even though they're not even the majority. But if it's in their place, then that's considered 50-50. And says the Gemara, where are they kavua? About Kahana, he says a Pasim Lochem Beis. It talks about what happened was that the Melech Ashur, the king of Assyria, he went and he exiled first the 10 tribes. And it says that he took them by Yanchem, Bachlach, Ubechover, Nahar Goizen, Varimodai, which we're going to explain each one of these where these are. Chalach is Echalazin, and Bechover, as we continue to Bizarmanav, Zu Chadyav, these are all names of places. Nahar Goizen, that refers to Zu Ginzak. Varimodai, the cities of Modai, Zu Chamdan Bechabersel. And Ramla, some say it's Zu Nihar Bechabersel, which is, and its environs. And Chabersel, man, what's the environs? Amashmul, it's Kerech, Mushke, Chidke, Dumakia, which Amar Bechanan says V'kulan Lepsul, meaning the majority are Mamzer, because different Girsais and Rashi, but the daughters of the 10 tribes were assimilated with non-Jewish men. Now, their children are like Jews, and therefore there's a meaning even if you hold that it's not Mamzerim, let's say with the non-Jewish father, with the Jewish mother, but they weren't careful. They treated themselves as if they were not Jewish. But we know the Issa of Mamzeris does apply to them. And they would marry their sisters, their daughters. So essentially they were all assimilated, and therefore they're all Mamzerim. That's what we're saying, that from that place, then we're going to say Kol Kavua, Kametza, Metzadami, and that a person would have to be careful and be Chayeshu Kedushin, even though essentially they're all not Jewish. Again, you have to be concerned that maybe that they are Jewish. Now, the Gemara is saying that Rashi gives the background that up until now, Rabbi Huda was saying over this teaching name of Ravasi. Like we said, there was Rabbi Huda Ravasi that said this halacha of Oivik Kochavim that does a kedushin mizman after kedushin, which we explained is in those places. But after Ravasi passed away, then Rabbi Huda came in front of Shmuel and says Rabbi Huda Ki Amritu, when I said this teaching Ravasi, Kamei de Shmuel, that you have to be concerned for a non-Jew who's being Mekadosh, a Jewish girl, you have to be concerned for his kedushin, again, in the place where the Aseret HaShvatim are Kavua. So Amali, so Shmuel said to me, he said, whoa, Bincha bo min Yisraelis kar bincha, your son that's coming from a Jewish woman, that's called your son. But the ein bincha bo min ha'ovedes kachavim kar bincha, but if let's say, we're talking about the Zayda, we're talking about his child who's getting married to someone else. So if his daughter is the Jewish woman and his son-in-law is the non-Jewish man, that's called your son. But it's not your son from a non-Jewish woman. If let's say your son, that person's son, marries a non-Jewish woman, that's not Kar Bincha, that's not your son, El B'nah. It's her son, which, as Rashi explains a little bit maybe technical, but the Pasuk says, when it's talking about not to intermarry, not to assimilate, the Pasuk says, Ki Yosr is Bincha Me'acharai, because he is going to take your son away from me, says God. Now Yosr is in the masculine, which is telling us that the father of the child, meaning your grandson's father, which is your son-in-law, if you let your daughter marry a non-Jewish man, he's going to take away your son, meaning your grandson, from after me. Which it doesn't say ki sasir, that she's going to take away your son, which would be the feminine. So obviously, bincha is not going on bitoy lisikach lebincha. The pasuk there warns both ways. Warns you not to have your son marry a non-Jewish woman, and not to have your daughter marry a non-Jewish man. So Rashi is explaining what Shmuel was telling to Rabbi Huda is that when it says in the pasuk bitoy lisikach lebnecha, his daughter don't take for your son, that's not what bincha is going on. Because if yes, it should have said, because the non-Jewish mother will be sasir, in the feminine, will take away your grandson. It doesn't say that, it says yasir, not sasir. So what we learn from the pasuk is that if your son gives birth to a non-Jewish woman, meaning from a non-Jewish woman gives birth to a child, that's not called bencha. And therefore we're not saying ki sasir is bencha, because it's not your son. And therefore, meaning because we treat that child from a non-Jewish woman totally like not Jewish. So essentially what the Gemara is asking is, so you don't have to be concerned for Kedushin because of the Shvatim that married the non-Jewish women, because the non-Jewish women, the children they had were not Mamzer, they're not Jewish. So therefore, it's not assimilated Jews. So what's the concern? So it says the Gemara that You're right, but vo'ikabanis. But there were the Jewish girls that were taken in captivity who married non-Jewish men and gave birth from them. Ravina says later on the second paragraph of Chav Gimel Mabeis that Shema number one thing that we do learn is that Ben Bitcha Habam and Avikachavim. Your grandson, that's your daughter, the Jewish girl who married a non-Jewish man, that is Kari Bincha, that is called your son. Because it says Bitcha Leisitin Levna. It says your daughter don't give to his son. And that's where it says Ki Yasez Bincha Me'acharai. And because him, that non-Jewish father, is going to take your son, meaning your grandson, away from me. For the fact, like we said, it doesn't say Ki Sasir. Obviously, it's going on Bitcha Leisitin Lebenai. And therefore it's saying that maybe your daughter is going to give birth to a son, and the father who's not Jewish is going to take him away from me. That's called Bincha. That's obviously he's considered Jew. And therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda to Shmuel, shouldn't we be concerned for the girls that were taken in captivity by the Aseret HaShvatim? You're answering me that, no, you don't have to be concerned for Abbas's halacha. You don't have to be Chesed Kedushin, because they're not Jewish anyway. That's only the men who married the not-Jewish women. What's with the girls who were taken captive by the non-Jewish men? So that says, Shmuel, interesting answer. He says, give me a tradition that the Bansa da Hudara, the girls in that generation from the Aseret HaShvatim, it's taru. That the simple wording of Rashi is that their uterus is split open, and it wasn't able to conceive a child, and they became akaras. So we don't have to be concerned for the Jewish girls from those days, because they had problems with fertility. They weren't able to have children. So therefore, there's no such a concern. That's one version. Ikidam, let's say a different version. Kermitika made the Shmuel that Rabbi Yosef, when they said in front of Shmuel this teaching of Ravasi, Amalei said to me, no, it's not a concern. Because Leizazu Misham, not for the men, not for the women. Because they didn't leave from there, meaning the courts in those days, they made the Aseret HaShvatim as bona fide non-Jews. Why? Because says in Hashem, why they get exiled? Because they rebelled against Hashem. Because foreign children they're going to give birth to, and therefore we're not concerned even for the daughters, because they actually treated them, they made, so to speak, Hashem made them into Ibn Kechavim, and they're like not Jews. And they actually lost their status of being Jewish, and they're not Mamzerim, and they don't have to be concerned for Kedushin as if it's Kedushin, because they actually treat them like Ibn Kechavim, and therefore we don't give them like a status of like Jewish Mamzerim. Thank you to anything.